Hello, welcome to Q&A number 5. It's been about 9 months since I've done one of these. Obviously things have been very busy, but I finally found the time to do one, and I've got a lot of questions from you guys and from listeners and from subscribers, which I'm happy to answer. So I'm going to answer all these questions, and then I will discuss sort of very briefly the future of the podcast, which is of course good. Things are just growing at a great rate. Firstly, for you, what is the link between accelerationism and occultism? I wonder if there is a logical thought process of you to drift from accelerationism to occultism, or if it is just two distinct interests you developed distinctively. There is a direct link between these two. Occultism, occult simply means hidden, and if you think about accelerationism and the idea of accelerating into something, accelerationists are trying to understand what it is we are accelerating into, and in a sense that is occluded as well. Both are connected by occlusion, of trying to find something which is hidden behind some sort of veil. There is a direct connection you could draw here, perhaps with someone like Schopenhauer. So, for instance, as I see it, the root of accelerationism in terms of form can be understood from Kant, especially Landian Kantianism, and Kant moving through to Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer then speaks of the veil of Maya. So if you wanted to somehow form a link between the two, Schopenhauer is probably your go-to. There is, the link really is just to do with the noumena. So, and what it is that is hidden from our representation of the world, our representation of the world. Now, in terms of whether or not occultism, what occultists are dealing with in terms of noumena and the outside, in terms of, say, Baphomet or demons and angels and this kind of thing, and whether or not that's the same thing accelerationists are dealing with in terms of what's coming in from the future, I think that would be a bit of a stretch on the aesthetic level, but I think in form that's very much the same thing. I think this... So, also favourite dish, I'm fairly sure that this person sent me that. Of course, so this is the same person. I've removed the names of people who sent me this. So, my favourite dish is pasta e aglio, which is simply pasta, garlic, and oil, but you normally would put... so it's basically, I make it with linguine. So you boil up the linguine and then a whole cup of really good olive oil, a whole bulb of garlic cut really fine. You sort of fry that. Then you put that in with the linguine, mix it all around, and then you do a handful of chopped parsley and maybe some parmesan on top. It's absolutely beautiful. But I don't have it very much because I don't. It's just it's the kind of thing that's ridiculously good, and I don't want to ruin it by eating it too much. But other than that, I enjoy pretty much every type of food. I have to be fairly careful because I do. I eat a lot. I mean, if you wanted other favourite dishes, steak and eggs, of course. Thai green curry, liver and onions with mashed potato. Yeah, it's a bit all over the place, really. But if I had to pick a cuisine as well, it would be Italian. So yeah. Next question. Should one bother doing philosophy in university now, or is it a lost career where not only your job prospects are low, but also you can just learn it by yourself? This is an interesting question. I never went into either of my degrees, the bachelor's being fine art and the master's being continental philosophy, with a plan, to be honest, which is probably how most people go into liberal arts degrees. And what I mean by that is I never particularly wanted to be anything. I enjoyed making art from a young age, and that gradually evolved more into the theory of things, and then I just simply enjoyed like the philosophy of the Continentals, and I found that course and I found it fit, and I just wanted to study it more as something to do as a rigorous study of that thing. Now, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would emphasize in the question here: should one bother doing philosophy in university now? Previously, I think it would have its merits because now, in the time before the internet, knowledge was far more fragmented and hard to get a hold of, and being having access to great scholars, living people who are great scholars, would be a true unique merit to do it. Whereas now, I would say that if the reason you want to study philosophy in university is simply because you enjoy studying philosophy and you just enjoy philosophy, just study it online alongside something else which is going to earn you a bit more money. that might be overly pragmatic for some people. If you're going into philosophy for to become a lecturer, to do something philosophically, um, try work out fairly early on exactly what it is you want to do, because there's a lot of fashions in the university, and unfortunately, if you don't fit those, you're not really going to get a job as a lecturer, and it's extremely competitive for not that amazing pay. And also, a lot of the things, I'm thinking of Justin Murphy here with indie thinkers. There is a lot of people who are creating options for academics outside of the academy to make money via courses now, which is equivalent, if not more, of what's being made in the academy. Because there's a realization now that a lot of people just enjoy philosophy and enjoy just studying it generally. So there is sort of this the fact that the philosophy market is sort of booming at the moment online, it seems, and I'm not sure that the academy in abstract is really going to help you with that. It's a bit dated in times, but this isn't a comment on the tutors or the people of the academy, because I think they're all in sort of agreement that it's controlled largely by fashions and a lot of dated ideas, unfortunately. The short answer of that is basically you've probably answered your own question, right? You're saying, is it a lost career with no job prospects? Well, if that's already what you're thinking, and if that's what you're seeing where you are, then I think it would be a silly idea to do it. Basically, do it. Either do it in the understanding that you're just doing it out of the passion and you want to work under that tutor or work within that specialty. And this is different in the UK because the grants here, me studying that at postgraduate level isn't going to hamper my life because it's not a proper debt in the UK, whereas it might be in other places. So basically, understand what your end game is well before you start the course. If you definitely want to become a lecturer, go ahead and do it. If you don't really know why you're doing it, then begin to question it and see if you can just get that same enjoyment online. Yeah. What is your opinion currently on nihilism, Ligotti and others' work? Would you ever consider yourself a nihilist, even in the Schopenhauer sense of passive nihilism? Okay, firstly, what is my opinion currently on nihilism? What is my opinion of nihilism? I'm not entirely sure it can be a thing, to be honest. It's very difficult to explain why that is. The soon to be released interview, which I believe is the one next week, actually. I'll release this week, and it should be next week. Anyway, it'll be the interview with Corey Anton, and we discuss nihilism. And in his book, how non-being haunts being, he gets very close, pretty much spot on actually, to something I've thought about nihilism, the idea of nihilism for a long time, which is that hidden in nihilism, the idea that everything is meaningless, nothing has any meaning, is itself the implicit understanding that there should have been meaning, and that therefore there is some meaning tangentially caught up in all of this, right? So what I mean by that is, well, all this nihilist rhetoric, whether it is passive, as in, nothing has meaning, that's so bad, and you just end up slinking into it and being drawn into it, or whether it's active, as in nothing has meaning, therefore I can just, I can do what I want and create, and it's great in that Nietzschean active sense. Both of these ride on the idea that a sort of begrudging human perspective of like, as if there should have been meaning for us, if you see what I mean. So the idea that, no, the universe, there's no meaning in the universe. Well, why did you assume that there would be? And surely from that assumption, we can begin to understand that there seems to be something more to all of this than such rhetoric would say. Basically, it's a very lazy argument on my position as a philosopher. I don't have time for nihilism anymore because I'm more, I'm spending more of my time and energy seeking out the alternative to it. It's very easy to just fall into that and say, well, nothing has any meaning, and get into that what I call bleaker than thou thought. And I think the same does apply. You asked what I think of Ligotti and others' work. Others I wouldn't actually know who to include in there. Many people would say Émile Cioran. I wouldn't include Cioran in there. But if we take Ligotti is a great, a Lovecraftian writer who has then brought out from this a really, one of the more articulate forms of nihilism now. And then there is also, of course, Ligotti's Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which is this now sort of infamous current contemporary text on nihilism. I read it almost like a Hulenbeck novel. It's just this defeatist pap written by someone who I find possibly got a raw deal in life and is just it's quite a lot of projection. And I find, to be honest, and I mean, I'm not going to avoid the Gagefian bias here for myself, but I find a lot of those texts, and this is perhaps where the difference for me for Choron comes in, is I don't think Choron is indulging in those what we might consider nihilist thoughts. He's doing something with them and finding a way to sort of react and resist from them. Whereas in Ligotti and others, I find a complete indulgence, which ultimately I find very pathetic. It's very, very easy to simply draw the line under nihilism and say that's how things are, and then that also basically justifies and self-justifies an indulgence in a ton of different habits and emotions which are just negative and not needed, and also it can justify some really horrible things in the way you deal with other people and you project yourself onto life. So would I ever consider myself a nihilist? No. The Schopenhauer sense of passive nihilist? No. I don't consider myself a nihilist. Not at all. No. Earnest question: what kind of jobs are philosophy grads being hired for? In my view, well, you can look at the sort of the statistics for this. The majority of philosophy graduates are being hired for marketing jobs, marketing, copywriting, sort of random business admin jobs. Ultimately, the things where you can sell your analytical thought skills, but ultimately we both know that. Well, we all know that really what those companies are looking for, they just see the degree and they see someone who is relatively competent and probably will be fine in their marketing department. Other than that, I don't really know what they're being hired for. Much like many liberal arts jobs, I think the degree itself is basically this tick that this person is competent, they can see something through, and they can be motivated enough to see a degree through to the end. Therefore, they're not going to be they're going to be a fairly good employee. This is what a lot of credentials are these days, which aren't extremely specific. English literature, etc., etc. Basic liberal arts degrees. Yeah. But other than that, I wouldn't know. Perhaps you can clarify further, but your openness to a possible eventual life-affirming position after encountering nihilism really resonated with me. Personally, I see either remaining open to life affirmation or denying it as one crude way to divide schools of thought. Even within traditions that otherwise share a lot of formal elements, I have experienced material life affirmation and after nihilism and difficult material circumstances. At times I am tempted to become polemical about this point, but one of the reasons I enjoy your podcast is how it showcases the range of conclusions that can follow deeply examined experience. Why do you think the mystical Hermetic experience contains these apparently opposed positions to life, in particular the value of material life? Why... Sorry, I will have to reread that last line. Why do I think the mystical experience contains apparently opposed positions on life, in particular the value of material life? Well, if I think I'm understanding you correctly, the value, okay, so the opposition that at least I can read into this question is that there's that stereotypical assumption that the mystical Hermetic experience, something above, beyond, you focus on what is beyond life. You focus on the astral body, the spiritual plane. In the Gagefian work, it's the Kesjan body, the soul, etc., etc., and that's your primary focus. And then in opposition to that would be, well, why is the value in the material life? And not all Hermetic and mystical, quote unquote, mystical experience and schools and thought systems do have a value on the material life. I mean, my brief foray in Neoplatonism, there's Plotinus himself. He hates material life, but there's always an interesting idea to be had there. And I mean, avoiding the ones where it's clear that they have this sort of tenuous relationship where they just want to try and avoid it all the time and feel it's some sort of like you're trapped in some skin vessel, which now is a position I just don't have any sympathy for. Really, people get mysticism wrong in the sense that they think it's like head in the clouds all the time and that you're beyond life. And really, most mystical schools, as I can understand them, are all about a greater attention in life and a feet firmer on the floor. Most people aren't most people don't have their heads on their shoulders. And to think that a mystical position is about having your head in the clouds, in fact, most of the time it's the opposite. And then from that, you could develop something where you can go beyond, or you can see deeper into life, or something like this. But at first, for most of these experiences, is an understanding of the value of the material world, whether it be a practice where you're sensing your body, a practice of asceticism where you get a deeper connection to the body. Most mystical schools begin with bodily practices for that very reason, that you've avoided the reality in front of you, the worldly reality where you have your feet firmly on the floor for most of your life. So you have to begin, most mystical schools begin from, you don't know what reality is, and we need to take you back to basics, and you need to understand, what reality is before you're thinking you're going to go into this some mystical, magical fantasy world. But actually the opposite is true. Your feet are going to be more firmly placed in the real world. That's the whole point. So yeah, that's, but your mileage may vary because different schools have different emphases. So, I can't comment. It's a very general comment that I made there. Next question. What are my thoughts on German idealism? You mentioned that you were very influenced by Kant. What do you think of Fichte, especially since he attempts to unify a complete Kant system and leading it to absolute idealism? I've spent very, very little time with Fichte. Very little time. So I really shouldn't comment there. It would be a lie for me to comment there. Schopenhauer, fantastic. But as I see it, German idealism splits off a lot, but the two main currents that you probably should keep an eye on is Schopenhauer and Hegel, and they're the two divides from Kant, which I think are of the real importance. Fichteans, forgive me, but I just that it hasn't spread its wings in the history of philosophy, unfortunately. And I'm more of the Schopenhauerian side, but not in the nihilistic sense as come earlier. But yeah. But what are my thoughts on German idealism? It is sort of a tough question because a lot happens in that very short space of time, and there's a lot of to really comment on that. There's a lot of writers who are overlooked: Jacob Sigismund Beck, Jacobi, Reinhold, and many others. But basically, all inspired and influenced by Kant. And, super controversial comment, which originally comes from Nick Land, but I agree with it, which is sort of like, can that whole tradition be subsumed back into Kant in a way? Did anyone truly, unify the system and actually, complete that system in a way? I don't see that as happening. Not at all. I think that people sort of concluded it in their own way. I mean, Schopenhauer especially, he did The World as Well as Representation, the 2 volumes, and he said, this is my system. And I think if you're in agreement with these things, then you could have a finished system of German idealism. But I think for the real Kantians, I don't think that's ever happened. And I'm not sure it ever will. I mean, Land, of course, is stating that it happens with Bitcoin, and that's certainly very interesting. I've done lectures on it, but whether or not it's true, we don't know. But what are my general thoughts on German idealism? Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's where philosophy for me starts. I mean, ultimately in your life, you're going to have to make a choice about what you learn really, really well. We don't have that much time in life, and you might be able to master some things in life. So ultimately, you do make a choice, and no one can know all of philosophy. And if you're starting from the classics, you have a lot to understand before you get to Kant. So when I say philosophy for me is Kant onwards, that is the era that I've chosen to really study in philosophy. With that said, I've to a degree I'm moving away from continental philosophy in a certain sense, but maybe I'll get to that in some other chat. I don't know, it's not something I'll get into now. What are my thoughts on the philosophy of food, or what prompted my reading interview with Nicola Perullo? Philosophy of food is, in the Anglophone world, extremely overlooked. You're looking at probably about 20 books, which isn't, sounds like a fair few, but it really isn't many in terms of a whole subsection of philosophy. Basically, I'm very sympathetic to it, both from the Gurdjieffian standpoint and a personal standpoint, in that I do enjoy food, but I enjoy it as an experiential thing, and I'm very sympathetic to Sayre, and I enjoy Sayre's work, and from that, basically, I'm I often think about the hierarchy of the senses in the way of we have had this predominant relationship with vision, which of course is justified in a way because that's the majority of representational experience. But I think in terms of jumping back to that mystical experience, what what is it of other senses which can allow us to open up something deeper in the world? So that is simply a great book, and Prullo is a great writer. Um, what are my thoughts on Bataille and limited experiences? Bataille himself is someone I veer away from. I think he's a dark individual and not someone you want to spend that much time with. Back to that nihilistic thing. He's someone who can make life like dirty and dark, and it's just after reading his biography, it's not really someone for me anymore. I really enjoyed Land's book on Bataille, but I think it's more of a warning in a way about going deep into Bataille. Where's his answers? What are his answers? And if what I think are his answers are his answers, then I don't really want anything to do with them. That's not a truth that I agree. I just don't see much objectiveness there. It seems to be this subjective sort of theatre. And limited experiences. I haven't read Bataille's book on limited experiences. I've read Visions of Excess. I've read the biography. I've read the general economy work. I've read a few of his novels. So that's where my comments are coming from. I really want to read the book on limited experiences, but like I said, I try limit my exposure to writers like that because it's just not it's not the impressions that I want to be consuming every day. Much like there's probably the same reason I veered away from Deleuze and Guattari in recent months and almost like year, is because knowing all that stuff, it hasn't benefited me in many ways. So I veer away from it in terms of I'm just sort of going a bit mad for no reason. Yeah. Seeing as I don't believe in free will, do you think we are predestined, or does there exist some ability of choice? Or is it more esoteric, complicated? Well, I'm happy to explain this. Free will is possible. I mean, this is, it's no... Yeah, everyone will know now, it's been a while, that I'm basically finding Gurdjieff was a ton of answers for me. Not fully complete. I've got to work on them. And that's the point. You can be skeptical in the Gurdjieffian scheme of things, and it's still all there. But in terms of free will, it's the classic story of you could rewrite the story yourself. But let's say to think of someone who seeks simply to go buy bread from the store, and they live only 100 meters away from the store, and they're thinking, right, I'm going to go buy this bread, and they're conscious of that fact. That's all they're conscious of when they're leaving. I've got to go buy this bread for dinner. Maybe they're conscious of, or for lunch. Maybe they're conscious of I need to buy bread, the fillings, and then they're thinking about the sandwich. And that's sort of, you could draw a line around that and say it's the same conscious thought of bread for lunch and fillings, right? And then they leave the house, and as they're closing the door, they see something they've left on the floor, like an umbrella, and then that takes their memory back to a day that it was raining at the fair, and then they close the door and lock the door, and they're thinking about the fair, and then while they're walking along, a bird flies in front of them, and they remember that they haven't fed their pet bird at home, and then a second later, there's a noise of a plane, and then they think about the plane, and then they think about the fact they need to book plane tickets for this holiday that's coming up, and then they think about, well, is this holiday going to be enjoyable, or what about the fuel shortages, blah, blah, blah. And then by the time they've taken this 100-meter walk to the store, their emotions, their intellect, their body has just absolutely strewn their attention all over the place. And these are the people, this is everyone's reality, and this is these very same people would say that they have free will, even though they are being pulled around constantly by emotional, intellectual, and physical forces which they had absolutely no choice of whether or not they came in. They just let them in, and then and that is most people's days. They're just a machine, a cog that's being pulled around by external forces and allowing themselves to be. And many of these would have made them angry, upset, sad. Some would have made them happy. Some would have put them in pain. Some would have made them doubt themselves. Some would have given them a new opinion. And all of a sudden they had no choice in this matter. And these people would say they have free will. And I think that's basically just ridiculous. Whether or not that means we're predestined, 99% of the time, for 99% of people, yes. Does there exist some ability of choice? Yes, but it comes after a lot of effort. To truly think about things in that way, it comes after a lot of effort. But to explain that, I would have to go into the whole Gurdjieffian school, including the idea of a three-brained being. But if you want, why that takes effort and how to make effort, then look up Gurdjieff's theory of the emotional, the intellectual, and the instinctive centers. Type in Gurdjieff horse carriage driver allegory, and that will help you understand. So, in short, no, I don't believe in free will. I do believe it's possible to have free will, but to get that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of sincerity, importantly, and honesty. What is my note-taking system like? Pretty sparse. I don't really take many notes. I generally, if I was to take notes, I would just be putting them aside and they'd probably never be used. Over time, I just try to be more attentive with books, and things stick and things don't. And I've never really done that, and I don't try lie to myself about that, at least on casual reading. So when I'm really studying a book, say for instance a text like Beelzebub's Tales, which I'm basically just studying constantly at the moment, but let's say other complicated texts such as texts of scripture, texts like Critique of Pure Reason, Being and Time, I would take notes. And usually the best way to really understand these books, and I'm not even joking on this, the books that I believe myself I understand to a more advanced level, I've almost been writing a line for like every 3 lines. You're almost rewriting the book in a shortened script which you understand. So Deleuze and Guattari will take 3 lines, and then you'll spend some time with it, or spend time with a paragraph, and you go, oh, that's what they meant. And then I might put that note in the margins, and it sort of solidifies and streamlines the process. But other than that, no, I'm not much of a note taker. I'm fairly just more of an instinctive. If it sticks, it sticks. It's always how I've been. Next question. Have I ever watched Terrence Malick's films? If so, what did you think of them and their philosophical themes like existentialism, Knight of Cups, and Christian theology, Tree of Life? The only one I've seen is Tree of Life, and I remember thinking that's like just outstandingly beautiful, but I didn't really know enough to, it was one of those films where I'm like, well, there's definitely something deeper going on here, but I don't really know what. Unfortunately, I was fairly ignorant of the, as you say, the Christian theology behind it, so I can't really comment. All I knew Terrence Malick was deep because I know he's translated some Heidegger. That doesn't mean, of course, he's deep, not at all, but he's clearly an intellectual chap. But sometimes with those kind of films, I can find it a bit forced, which is sort of why I enjoy Tarkovsky. I mean, his brilliance is in his simplicity. And I think he's one. It's rare that a philosophical film can work. Sometimes it comes across as quite cheap, and almost to the point sometimes where either it goes too far in the pretentious direction, and it's almost like that Badiou documentary where he started saying like, "What is a woman?" and it was like, well, what does that even mean? Or it can go in the other direction where they're basically spelling out their philosophy, almost like the film Fight Club, right? Which is like, I don't know, it's so transparent. So there's a certain line that it has to balance, which Tarkovsky does well. And I've heard Malick's films are great. So, is it The Thin Blue Line? I think is, or Thin Red Line? I can't remember. Which I've sort of got on the list to watch. I've repeated a question there. Oops. So the next question, a version of the Hermitix question. You can place 3 of the guests you've had on thus far into a room and listen in on the conversation. Who would you pick? Nick Land, John Michael Greer, and Abdul Hakim Murad. That would be the 3, and I think it would go on for hours between those 3. So you have as I understand it, sort of a cult, almost like like weirdly atheological religious thing going on with Land. Then you have a druid, pagan, arguably, and then you have traditional Muslim. I think that would be an astounding conversation, and also equally, all their visions of the future differ in such a interesting way that I think that conversation would be astounding. But then also there would be, for me, I would love another conversation with Joseph Azizi, just because I've come a long way since that first conversation about Gurdjieff. So, and it'd be interesting just to have two other sort of Gurdjieffians and have a conversation about Gurdjieff in there. Thinkers, academics, philosophers of the future, 30, 50, 80 years from now, what do you think their opinion of the now would be? Well, probably be the opinion of a lot of people who have the opinion of the now, which many people know to be true, but we still want to avoid, which is that basically we're in an anomaly of both intellectual, academic, and resource abundance, and we've never seen anything like this before, and we never will again. And people, maybe not in 30 years, but 50 and 80, will be looking back going, how did they not see that and change direction or do anything about it? I think that's all it will be. I think, but there's an interesting thing that was made clear to me today, that in Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff says this book will be written. This book will be read when there is no electricity, which I think is a great thing to say, and I don't think he means some super down the line, thousands of years. I think he meant fairly soon. And the history, as Greer says, the history of electricity will be basically like its start, but in reverse, and eventually it'll go back to having none. So, 80 years. To be honest, it's a really difficult question, because 30 years, I think, that's where we're really going to see the start of a lot of the problems which are definitely coming our way. 50 years they'll be solidified, and 80 is when they'll be so solidified they will have become a norm. 30, I'm not sure you're going to be getting too much philosophy around that time, because people are probably going to be struggling for work and things like that. 50, what are we looking at there? 50. I don't know, maybe then you'll start getting preachers and new mystical currents spring up. Maybe people even damning these times for that reason. And then 80 years, back to a sort of basic way of living. That's my thoughts. What influence did Heidegger have on your writing, or you in general? He didn't really have a huge influence. I mean, I did enjoy the being towards death aspect. I found the ready to hand and the present at hand a bit useless. Dasein was a very interesting concept. I didn't like his sort of faux aristocratic attitude towards craftsmanship, just as someone who's come from a joinery trade. And a lot of philosophers who use him go on about that as if it's some badge of honour, of authenticity. And it really frustrates me as someone coming from that trade of... not that I was any good at it, but, I worked in that trade for a long time, and, making sash windows and doing very fine joinery work. And the idea that it's some almost heroic, authentic deed in sense of radical tradition against this ensuing nihilistic wave which Heidegger spent his career talking about, I think is absolutely ridiculous, and it basically shows really, and not to get too left wing about it, because I'm not, but it shows this weird absence of Heidegger being able to really relate to anyone outside of his own little bubble. I've gone off Heidegger of late, and I even when I read him, I never really understood that he was talking about some nihilistic thing, and the concepts which could have been very helpful, he never really outlined. Authenticity was one, and maybe he was one of the first philosophers that made me realise that a lot of continentals are chatting crap, basically because he's using these words and not really knowing why. It's like, oh, authenticity. And if you don't then go on to explain it, well, what justification do you have to even use the word? So, yeah, whereas mystics would have the spine to at least define things. So, yeah. How is the floor sleeping going? No, I'll be honest. I slept on the floor for maybe a week to 2 weeks. And it helped, but then I've basically just got a very firm mattress now. But I just found that when I slept on a very soft mattress, even when those mattress toppers, I just have awful sleep. So I'm just someone who just needs basically a super, super firm mattress. But I would recommend floor sleeping for other things, just for it's a very clear way of realizing what you consider normal. And plenty of cultures still do it. In the East, many people sleep on, not directly onto the floor, but they'll sleep on a very thin mat. so it's not uncommon. Would I ever do a Hans George Gadamer episode? I definitely would, but because there's many philosophers out there who I can do the research for relatively quickly, especially if we're just talking about a text or an idea or a single book. But Gadamer, is it Truth and Method? That's going to take a lot of research. So I would happily do one, but it would take some time unless someone wrote, like a secondary book on Gadamer, which I could possibly read or something like that. But I do like to really know what I'm talking about before I go into a discussion with someone about it. So yeah, open to it, but it would take some time to do the research. And if someone could point me in the right direction for someone, then I'm more than happy to do it. But that is the questions. I'm trying to think. So about the future of the podcast, like it's just growing at a great rate. Of course, I'm super thankful for every listener, every subscriber. You guys are the best. You guys are great. What's new? Should be doing a few more lectures soon. I've got a couple of Ludwig Klager's lectures written out and ready to basically for me to read and present. And one of these will be on YouTube and one will be for patrons. Then I've got some Gurdjieff lectures on his basic ideas, very short ones, which these will be for patrons only. But they'll also be accessible to people who are joining up for the Hermitix work group, the Gurdjieff work group that we're doing. So I would like to just very quickly talk about that on Monday nights at 6 p.m. BST. Though that time may change, not sure about the day, but it might be a little bit later soon so we can accommodate more people. But at the moment, Monday nights at 6 p.m. BST UK time, we read around 10 to 20 pages of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, and then we discuss it. And of course, this, it's a bit daunting for some people because it's a very daunting text, but if you just ask in the Discord or ask me, there are resources for getting to grips with it, and it is a text I think you can jump into with us and then ask any questions, and newcomer questions are extremely welcome. But this is now sort of fragmenting off into a work group because people want to do the effort, make the effort, and take the Gurdjieff stuff seriously. So I'm going to create I'm slowly creating a website for that, and there's going to be resources to help people out there. So anyone who wants to be, included in that or is interested in that, let me know either by contacting me on Twitter or all the places that it is. And yeah, so that's one thing we're doing. What else? Probably we'll try figure out a new reading group for a text soon. But as to what it'll be, I don't know yet. Alongside that, there's just got to finish editing it, but soon Hermitix will be publishing Carl Duprel's The Philosophy of Mysticism in paperback with an introduction by Rico Sneller, and then me and Rico, I imagine, will be doing some other promoting that and stuff on here, so that'll be interesting. Other than that, it's just basically constant with interviews, and I always emphasize, if there's anyone you want me to chat to, a topic you want me to cover, contact me, comment, or things like that. And also, emphasize sharing it by word of mouth is always the best way. I want listeners who are interested. I'm not interested in millions of listeners, even though the podcast is doing extremely well in that regard. It is a big following now. I'm interested in people who are genuinely interested in the topics, and I'd like to sort of always keep it that way. It's always been a fairly tight-knit community of very nice people. The online discussions we have always stay civil, even people from all sides of the spectrum, all different ideas. Not once have I seen within Hermitix circles a big argument or ad hominem or things like that. So it's a really nice community, and I always urge people to get involved. But other than that, yeah, I'm sure I'll do another one of these within a few months. And until then, keep on listening, like, subscribe, all that lovely stuff, and support if you want to. The links are all about the place. And yeah, just generally thanks all for listening and listening to the podcast. And yeah, keep doing so. Thanks very much.